All right, so one thing I'll show you right away, if I just come up here to databases and right click, look at that, new database, okay? So that brings up a dialog box here where I can, instead of doing create database as a command, which works perfectly fine, by the way, I can do it interactively this way as well. So one of the things I'm going to emphasize right from the very beginning, now I've given you this power to create databases, please follow this naming convention. Every database you create, start with your username and an underscore, and then whatever name is applicable for the database. So, for example, I will make here dstovell, because that's my username, underscore, right? And I'm going to make one called company. Now, it already is set this way in our model, but just to point out all these options, right? There's all these options to set, okay? But there's a arrangement by which all these have a default value. So you don't have to specify options unless you want to change it from the default. One of the things that I will draw your attention to up here is this recovery model. What this is, there's only 3 choices. Oh, sorry, clicked on the wrong drop down. Full, bulk logged, and simple. So basically, this is to do with how much detail gets written into the log files. That's what it essentially means in the end. And it affects if you ever did have a crash of your system, how do you recover back? Simple writes the minimum amount of information into the logs, right? So the idea here is that, if you're doing periodic backups, right, then you should be able to restore the most recent backup and use the logs to get everything else so you're back up and running. Bulk logged gives more detail and more flexibility. Full means absolutely everything that goes on in the system gets logged. So you can instantly get the system back up and running again, right? I'll tell an embarrassing story. I spent since I came to the college, I spent one entire semester not teaching at all. I was seconded over to Niagara Research. We were doing a very interesting project. It was part of a cooperative effort with a design company down in New York City that was tasked to come up with designs for the new Brooklyn Bridge, as well as a new road system around where the Twin Towers came down in 9/11. And what they wanted a 3D visualization with real traffic, simulated traffic, right? So you could fly around and look at it with real traffic information going on. So there's another company that produces this traffic data, right? But to marry that into the 3D animation was where they were running into trouble because, some of these files had like 30 to 50 million records. And reading that into the animation was proving very challenging. So the question had come up, well, can we store this data, this large amount of data, in a database and stream it quickly enough into the animation to make it work? So that's why I went to work on that and do proof of concept to see if we could, and we did. Actually, it worked amazingly well. But a lot of the other advantage of having it in a database was so we could fine-tune. We could actually put data into the the 3-dimensional data points of where each vehicle would be in a timeline. We could put some anticipatory information in as well. But that involved me running some procedures that looked at multiple records at a time. So I had to use what is called a cursor, which kind of moves through. Think of a cursor going through a Word document, right? So unlike just doing a select or an update command that does batch processing, this goes through and touches every record one at a time. I had it on my recovery model on full. So with every bit of data from every record in 30 million to 50 million size tables being touched, I filled a 10 terabyte hard drive holding my server with the log file, and it crashed because I wasn't watching it, right? So unless you need, in a production environment you might want full, just keep it on simple. For us, on our little server we have downstairs, it's not very big, so if we all just don't change it from the default of simple, I'd appreciate it. There's really not much value add for us here to do anything else. And it just saves a lot of hard drive space is what it comes down to. So I just mentioned that as well. But, I X'd out instead of saying okay. So that's no good. So I'll make my dstovell. Oh, well, that would have just created it. But of course, I could also do this, right? I make a new query. As long as I'm in master, then I can create databases. So I could just say create database dstovall underscore company. And there. So I created it with a script. I could have done it interactively. In the end, the result is identical. Truth is, by doing it interactively, anything we do that way with dialog boxes and so on, in the end, all this tool is doing, the Management Studio tool, is it's writing the script for us. Everything is actually done by executing scripts, right? It's just that it helps us write the script. Okay, so that's the difference there. Now I look here and I say, I don't see it. Where did it go? Well, you should be aware that every window, every query window like this one, even the Object Explorer, each of these things has its own connection to the database, right? So what happens on one connection, it's kind of like Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, I don't know what that really means anyway, but I don't want to. Right? Okay. But each connection is separate. So just because I made a change in this query window with its connection, right, it doesn't mean that the Object Explorer knows about it. If I right-click Databases and say refresh, then if I come down here and look, I see dstovall company, right? So I've made my database. Yippee! Okay, and it is simple because that's the default. By the way, I should talk a bit about the system databases up at the top here. Just a brief discussion. There's 4 of them. So master, again, that's the one that I made sure I was in before I could create a database, right? Master is kind of like the conductor of the server. He watches everything going on. All the databases belong to him, so to speak, and he manages all of them and everything going on the server. So he is, exactly as it says, the master. The model is why I can count on having default values. So it's kind of like, you have document templates in Word, right? You're going to make a new document based on your normal template type of thing, if you've ever played around with that. The point is, if I create a new database, all of its properties, all those dozens and dozens of options we saw are available, they're all set in the model. If I want, from now on, every new database I create to have a different setting, I just change it in the model, and then from now on, every new database would, by default, unless I specify otherwise, have that new setting, right? So that's really all the model is. TempDB, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? It's just where all the temporary objects that are created to make things go faster at times, cached, if you want to think of it that way, that all goes into TempDB and gets cleaned up automatically by the system, so we don't have to think much about it in most cases. MSDB, if master is the conductor, MSDB is the timekeeper in the sense of the scheduler. Okay, you can actually set up SQL Server to run what are called jobs, right? So a job can be a set of commands, and you're calling this procedure to run and that procedure and these things to happen, and they can be scheduled to happen, say at midnight every night. It does a big data import from other systems it can talk to and massages the data, converts formats here and there, and then imports that data into different tables and carries out some analysis and things like that. That can all be set up as these different jobs. They get scheduled. You can look after notifying by sending emails, right? You can set up the SMTP settings so that the server, when it runs these different jobs, it can notify, oh, you're running out of hard drive space. Yeah, see, that would have been a good thing for me to have done when I was over at Niagara Research, right? So all that kind of overall orchestration and scheduling is all done in MSDB. So in a nutshell, that's what these 4 databases are, and that's only 4 databases. But whenever you see like sys.databases, sys.that, that's usually tables that are stored inside of master itself. Okay? We'll play around in master a little bit later, but for the most part, we just have to know that that's where you have to be to create a database, right? And that's as simple as that. Okay, so there's my company database, and away we go. Now, we'll come back and I'll play with my company database more in a minute, but what I want to focus on next is going back to Blackboard. If you go to the content categories, okay, here's where my reminder is about our IP address and how to log in and so on, but I also have a collection of some lab documents and resources here, right? Among them, I have some scripts that are designed and set up to basically give you some sample databases that we're going to use in class as teaching cases, right? So I have 3 of them here. Notice they're all named create username, right? Big hint, what I'm going to ask you to do, remember I said my naming convention, please always put your username at the front of any database you create, right? So we're going to want to do the same thing here as well. So let me grab, I can grab one at a time. Okay, maybe I'll start with Sport Motors. If I just click on it, it prompts me to open it with Management Studio. Because I have it open, it just comes over in here, right? Okay, that's good. Now, in the comments at the top, you'll notice I say here, note, you must replace all occurrences of username underscore, right, with your own username. Okay, I'm even giving you a hint, there should be 9 occurrences so you know you have it right. So the idea is this is all written in this sort of generic format here where it's username underscore, this is our Sport Motors database, for example. Well, we want to change that so that username is replaced with yours. Quick and easy way to do that, edit, find and replace, quick replace. Notice Control H is the keyboard shortcut. So I can get the same dialog box just by going Control H. Okay? And there we go. So what I want to replace is username underscore, wherever that is found. Let me just zoom for the back of the room. And I want to replace it with my username underscore. Let me emphasize why, let me get rid of that angle bracket at the beginning. There. The reason for the underscore is in some databases, of course, username is kind of like a keyword, right? The odds are that you'll find some database tables with a column or a field named username, right? Well, we don't want to mess with that. Don't go there, right? We don't want to touch that. So by doing the underscore at the end, it's just kind of a bit of a safety net to prevent us from changing things we don't want to change. But I can just click replace all, and I should get, there we go, 9 occurrences replaced. Okay, so now my script is ready to create it. Okay, of course it's underlining because I'm telling it to use and it doesn't exist yet. That gives me a moment to talk about the use command. You never had to worry about it last term because you only worked in your one database that you had access to. But now that you can create databases, it also means you can and will be working in more than one, right? A common mistake at the beginning is to be, executing queries and commands in the wrong database because you have multiple ones. So if in your script you want to change from one database to another, you just say use database. And the keyword go is an important thing. We'll talk more about how it works with batches and so on, but obviously it means complete this step before going on to the next, right? So that's what we want to do. You notice at the very beginning it says use master, go, right? Because to create the database, I have to do that inside of master. After it's created, and I create my D. Stovell Sport Motors, then I have a command to use that. So that will move the query, the focus, and what database I'm working in to the one I just created, right? Just to briefly, not to get into the details, but talk about this bit of code then. So in master, what this is doing is I'm checking if the database exists already, because I can't create it if it exists, right? So we want to clean it up. These scripts are all written so that no matter if you mess up the database, accidentally delete all the data out of one table, or mess up relationships because you're playing around, or for whatever reason you break it, it's easy to fix. These scripts will delete the old version you were using and create you a factory fresh copy, so to speak, right? So that you can run these anytime and it will just give you a brand new copy exactly the same again. So if you messed it up, you can fix it that way. Nice and easy. So it just checks if it exists. Just, this set offline is so that nobody's connected to it. We're going to take it offline so we can drop it down here, right? And then we create it. And that's just to guarantee I set the recovery to simple in case it wasn't. Because I don't want to run out of room or waste space. And then the rest is creating all the tables, putting the data in, and so on. So I should be ready. I should be able to execute it. Let me just show you one thing. Of course, if I click execute right now, what's going to happen? Okay. Obviously, it didn't work. Could not find procedure, right? That's because if you have any text, I know you saw that last term, right? If there's any text selected, it tries just to execute that and nothing else, right? So make sure nothing is selected, then want to execute, and there we go. Notice it says at the bottom, query executed successfully, right? There's a bunch of messages here as well. You can look at them all if you want, about all the things that were done. But it says it's successful, so all right, so we're good. Now, if I come over here, oh, I don't see it. By the way, there's a refresh button in the top, but a student last section pointed out sometimes it just is stubborn and doesn't want to refresh with this button. I don't know why. It used to in earlier versions, but in the last 2 versions it's been an issue. But if you right-click databases and say refresh here, then that seems to always work. So there's my sport motors database. And you'll notice that these are a little bit more complex than the ones you were working with last term. A few more tables and relationships and so on. Okay. But, we're moving forward. We're going to do a little bit more interesting work, so we needed something a bit more sophisticated than 2 tables, right? Although we're going to go right back and start working with 2 tables again in about 10 minutes. Let me just point out back in Blackboard once more, right under where I have all the scripts for these, you'll also see database diagrams here. So, for example, for the sport motors, what I've given you is this is a PNG file. It's just a screenshot of the diagram showing all the tables and the relationships there. Now, the scripting language, the drawing language of this is a little different from the standards we taught you last term, where we used the little crowfoot and so on. This is the built-in one in SQL Server. So just to explain quickly, see all the little yellow keys? Well, that just means it kind of indicates like primary key. That shows the one side of any one-to-many relationship. The infinity symbol, right, the 8 on its side, that means the many side. So that's what this little drawing stuff is all about, right? So you can see here that a supplier has many inventory items, right? There's a one-to-many there, and so on and so forth. An inventory item comes from one supplier and things like that. So, it's pretty straightforward how that works. Something like sport order detail. You've seen, what an order looks like, right? You have a customer, there's a header at the top of the order with the date, order number, stuff like that. And then you have lines on the order, right? Each of those is often an order detail. And they, of course, usually have some product that you're selling. 5 widgets, 10 something else, right? Well, those products in this case are the inventory items. So I'll ask quickly, what kind of relationship is there between sport order and sport inventory? Good review question here. Sport order and sport inventory. How do they relate to each other? You got to follow the lines and figure it out. Is it one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many? Good guess. That's right. Yeah, it's a many-to-many, right? It's a many-to-many, and sport order detail is that intersection table. Remember that from last term? To support any many-to-many relationship, you had to have that table in the middle, right? Sometimes called an associative table. I usually call it an intersection table. Either term is valid, okay? I just find intersection easier to say. So that's why I usually call it that. So sport order detail, because it's a child, so to speak, for 2 one-to-many relationships where it's in the middle, right? It supports a many-to-many between order and inventory. So a particular inventory item might be sold on multiple orders, right? And an order obviously might be selling multiple different inventory items. So that's how you can follow those relationships. All right, so that's the one. By the way, the other one we're going to mainly be using as a teaching case. This is the Ironwood University data model. So it's much more like what we have here at the college, right? You've got instructors or professors, departments, courses. There's the university section, okay? So that's like you're in section 1 here, of course, Prog 1198, right? And so here's student, okay? So what is the relationship between student and section? Between student and section, university student and university section. So that combination of the two makes up a composite primary key. Okay? All right. Just a good points to review as we're going through and looking at this. But the point is then, you might want to take a few minutes just after our, well, we'll have a break in a second here, before we start up again. Create each of these databases. Just please make sure, right, that you change the username first. By the way, every once in a while I'll come down here and I'll check, and I'll probably find, well, look at that. There's 3. Somebody ran the scripts and it just says username. Now it could have been, I didn't clean it up at the end of the last section, so they were just in here this morning. So we'll blame it on them. Those guys, they messed it up. They just created username underscore. Whenever I see these, I just delete them. So, don't count on continuing to use them, because I'll just delete it at any point in time. You'll never know when it's going to be there. So don't worry about it if you created it. I'll clean them up. So please follow the naming convention and create all 3 of those. Do that before we come back from break. But I think we'll call it a quit now, and we'll give you a quick bathroom break or whatever. Okay.